The Song of Ice and Fire book series provides a broad spectrum of masculinity and femininity in both genders and from multiple perspectives. There are characters who fit into established gender roles such as Ned and Catelyn, who fit into their society's expectations of masculinity and femininity. Many characters, however, deviate from their expected gender role, sticking out like a sore thumb in the rigid society of Westeros. But the show almost always fails to represent these themes in the story, often simplifying the story to make main characters fit into gender roles, or turn masculine women into arrogant warriors who turn against other women. In this video, I'll examine how these changes harm the story through multiple main characters' lenses. Daenerys is an interesting take on gender roles in the story. In the beginning, she's an object to be bought and sold, under the control of both Viserys and Khal Drogo. While she's able to break free from this control and create her own identity, she doesn't depart from her femininity. She uses her beauty as a tool in tandem with her military strength, and she has a kind of balance between both aspects of herself that most people in Westeros fail to achieve. This all gets thrown out of the window when she goes mad near the end. Daenerys, who had a legitimate possibility of winning the throne and ruling the Seven Kingdoms, almost instantly becomes an emotionally unstable psychopath. Not only does this play into the trope of women being too emotional to effectively rule, but it undermines an entire character arc's worth of growth. We spent most of the story watching her mature as a person and grow as a leader, including a ridiculous amount of time in Marine, where she practiced ruling for Westeros. To take an experienced ruler with no ulterior motive and a good heart and write her out of the story with madness as the excuse is lazy writing at best, and a sexist commentary on women as rulers at worst. As Slavoj Žižek wrote, the finale combines the rejection of a radical change with an old anti-feminist motif at work in Wagner. For Wagner, there's nothing more disgusting than a woman who intervenes in political life, driven by the desire for power. In contrast to male ambition, a woman wants power in order to promote her own narrow family interests, or even worse, her personal caprice, incapable as she is of perceiving the universal dimension of state politics. The same femininity which, within the close circle of family life, is the power of protective love, turns into obscene frenzy when displayed at the level of public and state affairs. Recall the lowest point in the dialogue of Game of Thrones, when Daenerys tells Jon that if he cannot love her as a queen, then fear should reign. The embarrassing, vulgar motif of a sexually unsatisfied woman who explodes into destructive fury. End quote. If the books end with Daenerys' madness, I doubt I'll be making these same points. It has been established that she's young and traumatized, and that along with her genuine desire for good is the repressed loneliness and the desire for home which she is doomed never to find. But to write a character's descent from a naive girl to a mass-murdering tyrant requires much more tact and good writing than the show gave us. Sansa's storyline for the first half of the series is mostly unchanged, but around season 5, when they start having to make stuff up, her character takes a nosedive in quality. Her betrothal to Ramsay is not only out of character for Littlefinger, but leads up to one of the most controversial writing decisions in the show. Sexual violence is never shied away from in the series, but the show steps past some boundaries the books never did. Martin never used the sexual assault of a female character for character development, or made us read an assault scene through a POV character's perspective. But the show has Sansa's rape used as nothing more than shock value, making an already extremely cruel character seem a little bit more evil. Her character after this makes little sense. She started to learn deception with Littlefinger in Season 4, lying to the Vale to join his side, and starting to learn his ways. But all of this is thrown away for 2 seasons until she can return to her story, where she can act as an annoyingly petty character to Daenerys. She throws all of her tactics and knowledge so she can make pointless arguments with Daenerys for a season, before becoming Queen of the North in Season 8, making an arc that feels pointless and dragged out. She fits into a feminine role the whole series, and the decision to make her a ruler rather than Daenerys is a strange commentary on the role of women. If you're a woman and you want to rule, you need to be stereotypically feminine and not advocate for any meaningful change. You succeed by waiting for your turn to be in power, but then doing nothing meaningful with it.
She had a Valyrian steel sword she called Dark Sister.
She's a heroine of yours, I take it. Are most girls more interested in the pretty maidens from the songs? John Keel, flowers in her hair?
Most girls are idiots.
Unlike Sansa, Arya Stark has some flaws leading up from the beginning. She's introduced as a contrast to Sansa's more stereotypical femininity, being more rebellious and tomboyish. But the show sees this as her being sexist, having internalized hatred for women and stereotypically womanly things. In the books, she simply just doesn't fit into these roles and avoids them because of that. But in Game of Thrones, you can only succeed as a woman if you're feminine like Sansa, or a tomboy who acts exactly like men. In my opinion, her character arc is going to end without her accomplishing any meaningful revenge. In the story, vengeful characters such as Oberyn or Robb are not given the success many other stories would give them. Martin more likely views revenge in general to just be more harmful to the person who has to take revenge, making the fake sense of justice not worth it. Arya especially, being only 10 at the start of her revenge quest, is not at all likely to come back into Westeros and take out every single target on her list. Just like the Hound, she's seen her targets die and been able to do nothing about it, which only leaves her more confused and aimless than before. It's after this I believe she'll have to reinvent herself and put her skills to use in more important ways. Instead, she becomes the Punisher in the show, taking out the entire Frey house as well as Littlefinger and the Night King. All this before she leaves the story, and the family she's tried so long and hard to reunite with, to become mini Christopher Columbus. She falls into a similar problem with all the other female characters. It seems like there is no purpose to a majority of her journey, other than just learning how to fight better. Hopefully, if the books are ever finished, we'll see Martin's true ideas about revenge in Sandor and Arya's stories, rather than lazily written revenge plots that only exist for cool fight scenes. Finally, Brienne seems to have the most radical departure from the books to me. She was the character whose arc revolved the most about gender in the story. She doesn't hate femininity and desires things like marriage, but she's also forced to conform to masculine ideals of knighthood just to get by. She's younger and more naive in the books, while the show portrays her often as rude or uncaring. We can see this in how, in the books, she feels remorse after killing 4 men, even if they were objectively bad people. In the show, she has no remorse over killing multiple people, and she seems more like a hardened warrior without emotion. One of the worst examples of this is after Jaime loses his hand, and in the show she tells him, "You're acting like a bloody woman." Not only does this fit into the Arya problem, where hating other women is something to be admired, but she becomes a more snarky and rude character, who criticizes a man for showing vulnerability. A lot of her best storylines are lost in favor of her new plot in seasons 5 and 6. Her arc and Feast had some incredible moments, like Maribald's character, with the possible reintroduction of Sandor. We also saw one of the truest examples of heroism, where she protects a group of girls from 7 of the brave companions, knowing that she will almost certainly die. Instead, we see Brienne, who has to accomplish both her oath to protect Sansa and her revenge against Stannis. It should be impossible for her to accomplish both, exactly when Stannis is charging against Winterfell, but her revenge is more important to her than her oath to Catelyn. This may go too far into my personal opinion, but Jaime and Brienne's relationship is the most positive and beneficial in the series. Jaime is forced to confront the bad parts of himself and ultimately grow beyond Cersei, his ego, and his guilt. He is able to give to her his understanding of her situation and the respect that she rarely gets from others. This ultimately goes nowhere in the show, and this potential relationship is forgotten so that he can reunite with Cersei. Her romantic feelings, her good heart, and her moral compass are taken away in the show to make a hollow representation of female empowerment, which relies on hatred of all other women and feminine things. There are many more examples of the poor treatment of female characters, one of them being Yara. There are a number of problems in her story, such as her pointless quest to save Theon. But making her be lesbian is poor representation at best. She does act masculine, but to have her be the sole lesbian in the show is just a stereotype that only furthers the idea that you cannot be straight and go against gender norms, and that you can't be stereotypically feminine and lesbian. There are many more female characters who've been written poorly, such as Cersei's uninspired character arc, Talisa's not like other girls mentality, or whatever the hell was going on in Dorne. But at this point I've gone on enough about the most important ones. Theon's story also focuses heavily on gender roles, with him not fitting into the ultra-masculine society of the Ironborn. His story in the books is a long, melancholic journey where he begins to rediscover himself and not become defined by others' opinions of him. The show simplifies this down to killing one girl and running away with Sansa. But one of the worst scenes comes when he's mutilated by Ramsay. Having your junk get cut off is pretty much the most emasculating thing that can happen to a man. But for the purpose of his arc, he needs to break away from the rigid norms that restrict him. In the show, this was played off as a joke, where he had it shipped to his dad and sister, before he had the unwritten redemption arc of killing one girl, running away, and sailing around for a bit before dying. Samwell also doesn't fit into gender stereotypes, being unfit for most combat at the wall, but still being very helpful to their mission. His one success in combat did little for his character, and his real shining moment in that book was working to get Jon to be the Lord Commander. In the show, though, he gets by with his reputation as the Slayer, and doesn't do as much to get Jon elected. He becomes more and more of a warrior as time goes on, and uses less and less of his intelligence, even when he was at the Citadel. He shows that the story's main value is fighting prowess, and the men and women who can't fall into that role are of lower value. In conclusion, the Game of Thrones writers took a story that explored gender roles in a nuanced and critical way, and instead turned it into a story where the women must put each other down to gain strength. The women need to either abandon their femininity or live rigidly within their gender norm. Women can't be rulers or revolutionaries, but they can't be caring and thoughtful either. The men need to validate their worth through violence, and those who don't fit under gender stereotypes become a joke character. If you find any of these characters empowering or relatable, all power to you. I love all these characters as well, but it's hard to deny that the TV writers failed to deliver in creating meaningful stories about the role of gender in society.